I recently learned what an oxymoron is. I thought it was an insult people called me when I said their mother was pretty ugly, but now I know it means a saying that contradicts itself. An example of this might be the term virtual reality or Britain's Got Talent. Well, I suppose that's not entirely fair to Britain. They're excellent at getting into YouTube scandals and building luxury ships. Actually, you know what? They usually get other people to build the ships for them, so you can't even say that. No, not like Germany. Germany designs, builds, launches, and sails their ships by themselves, and yet everybody loves to praise the lobsterbacks. Now, I can't say all the German hate is unreasonable, at least from an historical perspective. They've been seen to be liars in the past. In fact, my previous statement about building their own ships isn't even true. But modern Germany is fairly distant from that past they're so well known for. Even old Germany was distant from that future, and back then, every day just seemed like another Metbreken Monday or Simmelnodal Saturday. Getting into the German Empire, that's when you gotta be more careful. Their actions in Africa were atrocious and make me wonder where King Leopold got all of his ideas. Still, in the homeland at least, it was a vibrant period of culture and technological innovation, especially in shipbuilding. And with Germany now having an international reputation for strict discipline and harsh punishments, a possibly bipolar, war-happy emperor intent on picking fights, a conscription program for one of the most intense armies on the planet, a growing pollution problem, and a large group of people trying to get out, it only seemed natural that Germany would develop a prosperous ocean liner trade. At the forefront of this industry was the Hamburg Amerikanische Paketvaartaktien-Gesellschaft, or HAPAG, or the Hamburg America Line, spelled with a K just to piss me off when typing this script. Their biggest domestic competition was North German Lloyd, another successful shipping line founded and operated out of nearby Bremen. Lloyd was instrumental to the development of the city during Germany's late Industrial Revolution. The Hamburg America Line is extremely serious when it comes to ocean liners. My cousin once described Hamburg as the armpit of Germany, and for good reason. Everybody was eager to get out. In 1891, the Hapag ship Augusta Victoria is said to be the first ever to do a luxury cruise. That ship in particular was pretty fast, winning the Blue Ribbon, the award for fastest Atlantic crossing. Next in notoriety is the SS Deutschland, a four-funnel liner that fought with Lloyd's SS Kaiser Wilhelm de Grosse over the Blue Ribbon, trading it back and forth with her for a good while. Deutschland was a gorgeous ship, but had some vibration issues, being nicknamed the cocktail shaker by passengers, which I assume some 20th century reporter must have chuckled to himself when he came up with that real zinger. The shaking was real though. It got bad enough that part of the stern just fell right off from being shaken too hard. It was worth it though. She won the Blue Ribbon once and for all in 1903, stopping Lloyd in their tracks and winning notoriety for Hamburg America Line once again. It wasn't until 1907 when England of all places struck back with the RMS Lusitania stealing the record. Germany would get revenge for that one. By the way, that ship was built in Scotland, still no points. Upset at being bested, the Germans looked to the White Star Line and their policy of building floating palaces instead of focusing on speed records. Meanwhile, Hamburg America only had one premium ship, the Deutschland, while Lloyd had built 4. They watched in envy as White Star built the largest ship in the world with the RMS Olympic, and then watched with concern as the SS Clickbait departed. The Hapag ship SS America actually being the first to issue her an ice warning. But Hamburg America, they were cooking something big themselves. The first of these was the aptly named SS Imperator, launched in 1912 and completed in June of 1913. She was the largest in the world and by a lot. Titanic had a gross tonnage of a little over 43,000. Imperator was 52,000. That is an enormous increase in a very small amount of time. If you're curious about the largest ship currently, there's a few different ways to calculate it, but Pioneering Spirit is said to be the largest today by gross tonnage at 403,000. The largest moving object on Earth, second only to your mother. The Imperator was a major success despite having a rolling problem, earning her the nickname Limperator. She featured a Ritz-Carlton restaurant, a 2-deck-high swimming pool, and a terrible-looking eagle on the forward bow that was so mocked even Mother Nature took a shot at it by slicing its wings off in a storm. Let's take it and make it better. And so, laid down as Hull 212 in the Blom and Voss shipyard, they'd build the Bismarck later, SS Vaterland began her life as the slightly younger and fatter sister of Imperator, being launched on April 3, 1913, completed at 54,282 gross tons. Her fitting out was an extremely lengthy process, taking over a year before she could begin sea trials on April 29, 1914. These sea trials were actually astonishing, as she achieved a top speed of 26.3 knots, spreading speculation that with a little tweaking, she could take the Blue Ribbon from Mauritania, although this never took place. Besides, much like the David Bowie dragon fruit, It's what's on the inside that counts. And because of Vaterland's enormous 100-foot beam and uptake shaft configuration, she could support enormous interior spaces. Her funnels had their tubing run down the sides of the ship instead of in the middle, which was rather unusual. This set her class apart from many large ships of the era like the Olympic, which although did have some pretty big rooms, they weren't as open or sweeping as these. Let's get to the exterior of the ship. Gotta say, I like the breakwater on Vaterland being a small little superstructure island. It really emphasizes the size of the ship because you don't even notice it. It's like they gave her a good nose job. The Vaterland had a large 3-deck superstructure where most first and second class accommodations were housed, as well as additional lifeboat davits integrated into the side, which, as we know, seems to have caught on. From an efficiency perspective, it's pretty smart because it allows more walking space on the boat deck and doesn't take space out of a covered promenade because there's already one right there. Right, Costa Cruises? Other than that, it looks like they just shoved lifeboats wherever they could fit them, which would make sense given that the ship's construction overlapped all the industry standard changes that took place right after the sinking of Titanic. Vaterland had 83 lifeboats, launched by Quadrant Welland davits, 2 of which are actually motorboats installed with wireless communication. Also on the safety side of things, she actually had a telephone system running throughout the ship to link everywhere on board with the bridge. Vaterland has a super wide bridge over here, which makes the bridge wings look a little dwarfed. But what really catches your eye is this thing up here. It looks like where they store horses before a derby. I wasn't able to find any specific information on it, so I'm going to guess it was designed to catch a ton of air for ventilation to the lower decks, which would make sense given how few cowl ventilators there are on the ship. She has 3 funnels, one of which is a dummy and features these perforations. More often than not, these funnels would provide ventilation to the smoking room on board. Dummy funnels are still a thing, actually. In fact, Disney Cruises uses them on some of their ships to house a teens-only club, which based on that information, the funnel still services a smoking room. You're probably curious about these things on the side. Yeah, me too. They were just an aesthetic addition for the superstructure. Here we have the aft of her 2 masts, between which a telegraph cable ran operated by the German Telefunken company. That's not me being racist towards Germans or making that up. It's real and they competed with Marconi. This thing here is to give Rose some height as she does her perfect 10 when she jumps off the back. Nah, it's for the flag. Down here is the rudder, which is cool, and then her 15-ton, 4 quadruple-bladed propellers, each 19 feet and 7 inches, which for all you metric system users is about 18 hammer and sickles. These propellers were powered by enormous steam turbines and 46 water tube boilers divided up into 4 stokeholds. Math had not yet been invented at that point. Now as for this model I'm using, it was gifted to me by one maritime merchant, who is starting a new model business, and can I just say, this guy is legit. This is the highest quality model in my possession, and I bought the $700 Lego Titanic. He works with Yestr Toys to produce 3D printed resin models, and can provide solid gray models or painted ones if you're into that, but it'll cost a few more bones. I don't get sponsorships. These gentleman agreements are the closest I get. But can I say, I implore you to look at this guy's stuff, because he's a wonderful guy to talk to and has a talent for model building. He does everything on commission, and is so gracious that he asked me to tell y'all to email him if you see anything wrong with his model here, because he's always striving for improvement. You can contact him on the email on screen and in the description, plus a link to his channel, as well as the link to the Yestr Toys email and Facebook page. Alright, back to me inching closer to the German government watch list. Now, when Vaterland was built, she was a pretty big deal. They had to rebuild the slipways just to accommodate her, and construction began in September of 1911. And like her sister, she'd have a pretty strange layout for the era. Most notably is the aforementioned funnel situation, which made for huge open spaces at the cost of convenience of construction. She was built by a ton of impoverished German workers, but history doesn't care to report on the poor, and I'm not going to start now. Let's talk about the rich. Yes, that's more our speed. First-class accommodations on the SS Vaterland were ridiculously fancy and extremely well laid out. Something about her interior just feels different than the other fancy stuff on other ships. Those all feel kind of the same. This feels fresh and comfortable. Her Ritz-Carlton restaurant is a great reflection of this. Its design feels open and warm. The restaurant feels like a great place designed for the public, not just based on some palace. One change is how much natural light there is coming through. Because of the wide open spaces, rooms weren't as crowded and ceilings not as low to the ground, allowing natural light to bathe the whole room. Her dining saloon is another good example of this. Look how big and open this room is compared to the dining saloon on Olympic. Her swimming pool is also pretty elaborate, especially given that most swimming pools on ships look like this. While many ships of this era seem to be built like palaces first and hotels second, Vaterland in the Imperator class seems to have focused on the hotel aspect by having this emphasis on comfort in wide open spaces, even here in the pool, which was actually modeled after a Roman bath. This idea is elaborated on in the marble wash basins and actual beds instead of berths. Vaterland also features a lot of artwork, not just on the domes. Even a view to the entrance of her grand salon shows a gorgeous painting of whatever this is. There was also a winter or palm garden, a main lounge with a dance floor and stage, and elevators. Now, second class was a scaled down first, featuring berths instead of beds, but an altogether lovely dining saloon that I cannot find a picture of for the life of me. I'll just have to take everybody's word for it. I think it's funny, the advertising described the second class lobby as having the same level of enchantment as the first when like, this is my grandmother's basement, and this is dinner with the president. Third class was standard clean and basic of the time. Germany had a reputation for her ocean liners having poor third-class conditions, evidenced by this famous photo, the steerage taken aboard the Lloyd liner SS Kaiser Wilhelm II. The Imperator class was an improvement, but don't get your hopes up. Now let's get back to what's weird about this ship. Because the Vaterland came out right as Titanic went down, the Hamburg America line continually advertised how safe the ship was, saying how lovely it is that the ship has a steel double bottom, which Titanic also had. She did have a double skin running a good length above her waterline, though. The layout of her watertight bulkheads was pretty efficient too, each containing a ladder that ran to the top of the ship in case someone needed to make an escape. The line was so confident in the ship that supposedly before her sea trials, they took her out to deep waters and flooded a third of her watertight compartments just to prove she wouldn't sink. She didn't, but they greatly inconvenienced everyone around them because they had to use every water pump available in the area to drain her, pissing off the German Coast Guard. She also has patented Fromm anti-rolling tanks, which, although she was called extremely steady, her class is kind of notable for rolling, so it's likely this was only a partial fix on the Limperator's rolling problem. She had a crew of 1,234, which that's kind of fun, with a Commodore in charge of the whole operation and 4 quote-unquote captains running the show. She also had 7 officers on board, 446 stewards, and in the stokeholds, 403 members of the Black Gang. She could accommodate a total of 1,965 passengers, which is actually not a lot given her size, but it is a lot given that, that's a lot of people. Now, getting into her career, I want you to think about when the Sonic movie trailer came out and everyone whined how bad he looked. And then think about when the new trailer dropped, when they fixed him and everyone celebrated and praised the studio. A scaled-down version occurred between the Imperator and the release of the Vaterland. Vaterland's maiden voyage was pretty celebrated at the time. The Imperator was huge and ambitious, but a little clunky, rolly, and altogether an experiment. Vaterland had the luxury of fixing those issues that came to Old Limpy, and was extremely popular as a result. She ran a route from Hamburg to New York, officially running from Cuxhaven, Germany to Hoboken, New Jersey. The only issue was she had only a summer to run this route before the First World War. I'm not going to get into it, you know what happened, but basically everybody was just notified that we're at war and the Vaterland has got to figure out what to do and where to go. She was able to make it to her pier in New Jersey, I'd rather be stuck in a war zone, and just hung out for most of the war with little maintenance work. She slowly deteriorated from the inside out. Just put on a 2017 Logan Paul video and experience it for yourself. Hoboken was a neutral port for most of the war, but the Germans just kept creeping onto America's doorstep and leaving flaming bags of, well, you know. Each time Germany sank a new passenger ship, I imagine Vaterland just sweated a tiny bit more. Sometimes the ship would be used to hold charity balls for the German relief effort, a group trying to support Germany during the war, as American sentiment in the early war had some favor towards Germany. Well, as you know, the U.S. Senate approved a declaration of war on April 4th, 1917, which like 90 years later was actually my dog's birthday, and the House approved it 2 days later. So the United States Shipping Board seized the ship on the 6th of April, and her crew was sent to an internment camp in Hot Springs, North Carolina, where most of them would die of typhoid fever. They also seized the Hamburg America Line piers in Hoboken and renamed them the Hoboken Port of Embarkation. That's rather pretentious. In July of 1917, Vaterland was given to the Navy to be converted into a troop carrier called the USS Vaterland, and in September she was renamed the USS Leviathan after a biblical fish. She was commissioned to the U.S. Cruiser and Transport Force, and did a trial voyage to Cuba to make sure she was seaworthy. After that, she carried men to Liverpool, England, and was taken in dry dock, though her enormous size proved troublesome in her final conversion. She was so large she could only be removed on full moon tides. She was given a dazzle paint scheme and sent off to carry Americans to the front. She could carry around 8,900 men on a single trip, which would be updated to over 10,000 later on. But she once actually carried 14,000 and averaged around 11,000 per trip. She ran from Hoboken, New Jersey to Brest, France, which is a real city name, and France needs to stop giving me material. Leviathan generally traveled in a defenseless convoy with the SS Northern Pacific and Great Northern, respectively. In June of 1918, the German press reported the Leviathan had been sunk, which, where did that even come from? And in September, around 2,000 of her passengers got the Spanish flu and 80 died on board. When the war ended, she was given a flat gray paint scheme and sent to bring our boys back home. She had carried 119,000 men by the end of the war. So now what? America can't just steal a ship, can they? Well, Treaty of Versailles says the Allies can do whatever they want. So the Imperator Trio, yep, there's a third one, not yet finished, is split up. And the Leviathan goes to the United States. It just seemed the most convenient. The U.S. Shipping Board officially owns Leviathan, and within the board exists the Emergency Fleet Corporation, created to manage all seas German liners after the war. They rebranded it as the United States Lines to seem less bureaucratic, and they operated off the old Hamburg America Line piers. But before all that, Leviathan just sits laid up in New York. It's not until 1923 when she officially joined United States Lines and went through a huge makeover to seem more patriotic. A lot of reverse engineering went into the conversion because the Germans seemed to have refused to hand over her plans. New funnel buff, new paint scheme, whole 9 yards. Even the dining saloon was upgraded. On June 19, 1923, she went on her sea trials for her new owners and operated at a top speed of 27.48 knots, which is insane. They also recalculated her gross tonnage to be over 59,000, but this is mostly attributed to the differences between American and European methods of calculating tonnage. SS Leviathan was marketed as the largest ship in the world. She set out on July 4, 1923 for her first voyage under the Stars and Stripes, and it went very well. She was by far the largest ship in the U.S. merchant fleet. Hey, shout out to the U.S. Merchant Marine. However, the biggest disadvantage to being an American ship was that Prohibition carried on board even when she left American waters. On top of that, the U.S. curbed immigration in the 20s, making her enormous carrying capacity seem more and more obsolete. She had some notoriety, but just couldn't seem to get a lot of people on board. In 1926, she averaged 1,300 passengers per voyage, but given her capacity, that's kind of an issue. Slowly, the ship was losing money for the line, even with new oil-burning engines. Even in the late 20s, when Prohibition was laxed and she went on booze cruises, she still wasn't really profitable. But when the Depression hit, that was the end for any hope of her being successful again. In 1931, to conserve money, her tonnage was quote-unquote recalculated to 48,932 gross tons to save money on port fees, which were done by tonnage. Only a year later, she was laid up at last. I mean, come on, man, she's been doing basically nothing now. For 5 years, she sat with fate unknown until December of 1937, when she was at last sold for scrap and traveled by her own power to Rosyth, Scotland. And that's it for her. Now as for me, I like this ship a lot, and her class surprised me with how much info there is about them. A lot of times, I can't make a video I want because there's too little information or too few pictures of the ship to work with. Not Vaterland, and I'm honored to have been sent such a lovely model of her by Maritime Merchant. I keep getting comments asking me to do a face reveal. I think my camera is just not good enough for that. So what did we learn? Just because you're weird on the inside doesn't necessarily mean you have any less value to the United States military. God bless America. I just wanted to say, for this video, I had to look up dragon fruit varieties, for the David Bowie dragon fruit bit, and there are just some, wonderful ones, like the Voodoo Child, the Physical Graffiti Dragon Fruit, and my personal favorite, the LA Woman.